We bear the fruit because he nourishes us. If you're saved 10 years and comfortable in sin, let me tell you, you've been unsaved for 10 years. You're not saved. Because at some point, the spiritual nourishment you receive should have been conviction of sin. Should have been a desire to be like your Father. Verse 7, little children, let no man deceive you. He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. The address here is again to the little children or young converts in the church. The Gnostics lived in open sin because according to their doctrine, you could sin in the flesh and it wouldn't affect your spirit. John is assuring them that those who live in open sin aren't saved. Now, there are two things we want to avoid in this verse. The first is that this verse applies to all people of all time. This verse is not saying that anyone who is moral, devout, and faithful to their religion is saved. That's not a conclusion we should draw from this verse. In context, John is addressing a specific issue with the Gnostic teachers. So today, a Mormon who does righteousness and lives a religious, moral life is not in John's purview here. That's not what he's talking about. Even in the first century, there were people like the Galatians who were outwardly moral and religious people obeying the law. The problem is they were unsaved. They believed another gospel. Galatians 1, 6, and 7. I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. The law couldn't save, which means the law cannot complete our salvation either. Listen to Galatians 3, 2, and 3. This only what I learned of you. Received ye the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Are ye so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh? No, that's the answer. No. And you might ask, if someone bears fruit, was that what he's talking about? Bearing, if someone bears fruit, they must be a Christian. The answer is yes, but the fruit is not obedience to Moses, it's obedience to Christ. In other words, my friend's a faithful Roman Catholic. Surely they must be saved. They're so faithful. The one who does righteousness is righteous, right? How do you do righteousness? First of all, you obey Christ, which means you believe upon Christ. That's the first thing. If you're trusting your works to save you, you're not obeying Christ. So right there, you've lost that. Obedience, fruit of salvation is obedience for Christ's sake, not for Moses' sake. Does that make sense? It means obedience from inward compelling, not outward conformity. John 1:17, for the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. We've been redeemed from the curse of the law. Galatians 3, 13 and 14. Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree, that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Christ redeemed the Jews from the curse of the law, that the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles. That's us, by the way. That we might receive the adoption by faith. The law is not of faith. It says in verse 12 of Galatians 3, the law is not of faith, but the man that doeth them shall live by them. Turning to the law meant leaving the doctrine of grace. Galatians 5. Go ahead and turn there with me real quick. Galatians chapter 5. I want you to read this one with me so you see it. We're almost done. Galatians 5. Galatians 5, verse 1. Paul says here, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. What's he warning against? Going under the law. That's the yoke he's talking about. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he is a debtor to do the whole law. In other words, you want to live by the law? Obey it fully all the time. You can't do it, can you? You don't have to. Christ did. Christ did. Christ is become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, you're fallen from grace. If we find our justification in the law, if we find our salvation in our obedience, we've fallen from grace. Well, my friends, what they lack in faith, they make up for in works. God will understand. No, he won't. No, if we're trusting our works, we've left the doctrine of grace. We live at Calvary, not at Sinai. They walked by outward conformity to the law. Talking about the Jews. They walked by outward conformity to the law. We walk by inward transformation, by faith, not by sight. You're in Galatians 5, look at verse 5 and 6. For we through the Spirit wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. Whether you eat pork or don't eat pork, mix fabrics or don't mix fabrics, shave your beard or grow your beard, whether you keep the festivals or you don't keep the festivals, whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised, none of that profits you anything. Faith and faith alone. See, the Torah movement today will say, they'll just say, well, we're just obeying the Torah given to Moses, so, we trust Christ, but we're doing these things. We're keeping the Saturday Sabbath. We don't mix fabrics. We follow the dietary laws. We follow the festivals because we love Jesus. But if you don't do it, you're not really saved. Uh-oh. Here's the problem. That's what they told the Galatians. You're not circumcised, you're not really following Christ. They must be righteous because they do these things, right? No. Don't let this verse be used to defend error. Apply it in context. Another thing that these groups, from the Adventists and the Hebrew roots to the Torah obedience movement, what they do is they boast and they brag, not in Jesus, but in their Sabbath observance, or their festival observance, or their diet. You're on social media, Shabbat Shalom, I keep the Sabbath. You're boasting in yourself. I used to know a bunch of Seventh-day Adventists at a hospital I worked at. They used to come in there as patients. They come in and visit, and they had these jackets and T-shirts that said Sabbath Keeper. What are you bragging in? Yourself. Look what I do. I keep the Sabbath on Saturday. Look at me, no bacon here. I'm keeping the law. Any religious group that finds their boast in their obedience to God, they're no different than the Jews of old. Our answer to our faithfulness should be humility. Listen to Matthew 25:44. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? When do we do these things to you, Jesus? He's going to say, in the course of everyday life, you were doing it to me. They're not sitting there going, yep, Jesus, yep. We visited in prison, we went to the sick, yep. We fed the hungry. No, that's what the guys in Matthew 7 are doing. Lord, have we not done this in your name, and done this in your name, and done this in your name? And Jesus is like, I never knew you. They're boasting in their works. In Matthew 25, they're saying, when did we do these things? And he's like, oh, you did them. I saw it. How about Luke 17:10? So likewise ye, when you shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. No boasting. Just, Lord, why are you rewarding us? We just did what we could do. You rescued us. You saved us. You freed us. It was the least we could do. That's Christ. That's the Spirit of God. It's Sinai that says, look at me and my works. Look at me and my obedience. Never, the Spirit of God will never bring us to boast in our accomplishments or our obedience, ever. He always points back to Christ. Always. Go back to 1 John 3 real quick if you would. We're almost done here, I promise. 1 John 3. The second thing we want to avoid in John's thought is that he is speaking of inward righteousness. That's in verse number 7 there. The only righteousness that we have is being declared righteous by faith. The context here is the same as it was in the last few verses, which is outward righteousness that flows from the renewed inner man. The one who walks in the steps of Jesus, seeking to obey him, that person is saved. They have been declared righteous by God. They have a new nature, and that new nature cries out, Abba, Father, I want to be like my Father. The person who lives in open sin and rebellion, that person has not been renewed in the inner man. It is not in possession of the imputed righteousness of Christ. They're like their father, the devil, and the works of their father they will do. Verse 8, he that God's children. As children of God, we have the likeness of our Father. We will live and walk by faith, not by the law. Our boasting is not in our keeping the